सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us. May he give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Friends, you know, we have now lifted our restrictions to attend our lectures in the temple. Now only we expect that you should be vaccinated, masks optional, and we now opened our door after 2 years. We shall be very happy all of you come regularly. And another good news I already mentioned last Sunday, that we have now an assistant minister, Swami Shivarchanananda. He came on the 12th of April. And he will also start work in May. He will speak on Buddha, and slowly it will take some time for him to adjust. Anyhow, it took me also some time to adjust when I first came. So we are very happy that we have a guest speaker, Pravrajika Shuddhatmaprana. She is a nun of the Vedanta Society of Southern California, but she is stationed at Ridgely, Vivekananda Retreat in New York. Those who have studied Vivekananda perhaps know that Mr. Leggett, Francis Leggett, who was the president of the Vedanta Society of New York, had a country home which is nearly over 100 miles from New York City, Ridgely, Stone Ridge, near the Hudson River. We got that property because Vivekananda stayed there in summer 1899. So it is a very holy place to us. So she and another nun both take care of that huge property, and they conduct retreat there. So she originally from St. Louis. She is a disciple of Swami Satprakasananda, and she is a very good editor and writer. She is one of my editors. So I really appreciate her work. And she will speak today on to lose oneself is to find oneself. That is a very beautiful topic she selected for us to speak this morning. And she spoke here several times, so some of you know her. And after the lecture, she will sit in the library. You can talk to her. But I will be busy here, Zoom, question and answer. We have devotees not only St. Louis, all over the world. So I have to entertain them also. It is all entertaining business. So I request Pravrajika Shuddhatmaprana to speak on this topic. She is a very good writer. Thank you very much.
I haven't been here for 3.5 years because of the COVID and other things. It's just nice to be back home. In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the Master recounts a conversation he once had with Narendra, Swami Vivekananda. Ramakrishna said, I said to Narendra, Look here, my boy, God is the ocean of bliss. Don't you want to plunge into this ocean? Suppose there is a cup of syrup and you are a fly. Where will you sit to sip the syrup? Narendra said, I will sit on the edge of the cup and stick my head out to drink it. Why? I said. Why should you sit on the edge? He replied, if I go far into the syrup, I shall be drowned and lose my life. Then I said, but my child, there's no such fear in the ocean of Satchidananda. It is the ocean of immortality. By plunging into it, a person does not die. He becomes immortal. A person does not lose consciousness by being mad about God. Then Ramakrishna went on to say, the feeling of I and mine is ignorance. People say that Rani Rashmani built the Kali temple, but nobody says it was the work of God. They say that such and such a person founded the Brahma Samaj, but nobody said it was founded through the will of God. This feeling, I am the doer, is ignorance. On the contrary, the idea, O God, thou art the doer, and I am only an instrument. Thou art the operator, and I am the machine. This is knowledge. Really, we have to wonder. The Lord's whole being is one of love and bliss, and we humans are constantly looking for just that very love and bliss. Yet we invariably turn away from God, fearful of drowning in that love and bliss, and instead we turn towards the world. What strange creatures the Lord must think. But then we could also argue, as the Katha Upanishad does, it's all his fault. The Upanishad says the self-created Lord has created the sense organs with the inherent defect that they are by nature outgoing. This is why beings see things outside and cannot see the self within. Rarely is there found a wise person seeking immortality who can withdraw his sense organs from external objects and see the self within. So what is this defect that the Lord has created? It is our sense of a separate identity. We think this separateness is normal. And like Narendra, we think we shall die if we merge in God's ocean of immortality and bliss. And this separateness is what Ramakrishna calls our sense of I and mine, our ego sense. This ego sense, what is it? It's just a mask, like a mask, maybe a little more than the mask we wear for COVID. But it's a mask we put on, a mask that identifies us as a certain individual with certain likes and dislikes and certain talents and flaws. But in reality, we are not connected with any of those likes and dislikes or talents and flaws. Because this mask covers up who we really are, we think we're the mask, and we forget that we are the pure, shining being who is behind the mask. We've probably all heard in our studies of Vedanta that the ego is the greatest obstacle to the realization of Brahman, or God. Ramakrishna has emphasized this many times. He said, a person is able to see God as soon as he gets rid of ego and other limitations. He sees God as soon as he is free from such feelings as, I am a scholar, I am wealthy, I am honorable, and so forth. Again, Ramakrishna said, ignorance lasts as long as one has ego. There can be no liberation so long as the ego remains. O Lord, thou art the doer, not I. That is knowledge. Yet as long as we have a body, we can never totally get rid of the ego. So Ramakrishna has also said that a devotee can transform the ego and purify it by establishing a relationship with God, such as thinking of oneself as the servant and God as the master. It is this purification of the ego, actually the melting of the ego, that is really what is meant, as no one who occupies a body can totally get rid of the ego altogether. Even then, however, the ego is very persistent. Ramakrishna gave the example of a tree that has been cut down. You think it's dead, but soon you see a sprout rising from the stump. That's the ego, always popping up and always getting us into trouble. Again, Ramakrishna said, all troubles come to an end when the ego dies. This is because all our desires and negative emotions are centered on the ego. Desire, anger, jealousy, hatred, fear, pride, all these passions and negative emotions feed our ego and make it grow. Bigger and bigger it gets, and the bigger it gets, the more problems we have in life. Ramakrishna compared these passions to an alligator, and we can just picture it. Desire is like the mouth of the alligator, always with its mouth open, wanting to devour more and more enjoyment and recognition, and never satisfied. And anger is like the tail that swats anything that gets in its way. Then jealousy, hatred, fear, and pride are like the 4 feet that move this alligator forward, pushing the ego on with more and more demands and always getting us into trouble. We can see then that all of these emotions depend on the ego, and vice versa. Without desire for something, the ego cannot function. Then with desire comes everything else, all the other passions. All of these emotions reinforce the ego in its feeling of separateness from others and from this world, and they make our life miserable. Instead of expanding our heart, they contract it and make us think only of ourselves. Moreover, they also make us forget our real nature, our divine eternal self. We think we are the body and mind and ego, and we forget our higher self. In addition, these passions not only bind us to this world, but they also bind us to those on whom we focus our passions. For example, if we hate or fear someone or are very jealous of someone, it's as if we become tied to that person. Not only do we lose all peace of mind thinking about that person, but we also create for ourselves an iron chain that ties us to that person, perhaps even from one lifetime to another. The Srimad Bhagavatam gives an example in the character of Kamsa, the king of Mathura, who feared Krishna so much that he could not stop meditating on him. So it's no wonder the scriptures are so adamant that we break these chains, and it is we ourselves who have to break them. No one else can do it for us. Like a boat that is stuck on the shore because its anchor is down, we become stuck and cannot move forward or make any progress in our spiritual life. Now, all religions recognize these problems, and they all have their ways of tackling them. And we're going to look at several ways here. But one of the main ways is to see ourselves in others, or as in Hinduism, Christianity, see the Lord in others, see all as manifestations of God. The idea is we must understand that we are not separate from others. Swami Vivekananda beautifully describes it in his poem, To a Friend. From highest Brahman to the yonder worm, and to the very minutest atom, everywhere is the same God, the all-love. Friend, offer mind, soul, body at their feet. These are his manifold forms before thee. Rejecting them, where seekest thou for God? Who loves all beings without distinction, he indeed is worshiping best his God. Okay, we have to admit it. It takes a lot of mental strength to come to this level. If this seems too difficult now, then let's look at it in a different way. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of St. Francis of Assisi. He was born in Italy in 1181 or 82 and was adored even during his lifetime as a second Christ. His influence was so great, really unbelievably great, that during his short life of 45 years, he was able to revive people's waning faith in Christianity throughout most of Europe. How was this possible? Simply through his total humility and self-abnegation and his love for Christ. Moreover, by identifying Christ with the poor and downtrodden people of his day, he completely lost his identity in Christ. There are many parallels between Ramakrishna's life and that of St. Francis of Assisi, but here we're just going to look at one of his writings, the Prayer of St. Francis. Sometimes we find that the simplest things are actually the most profound, and that's the case with this poem. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring love. Where there is injury, let me bring pardon. Where there is discord, let me bring union. Where there is doubt, let me bring faith. Where there is error, let me bring truth. Where there is despair, let me bring hope. Where there is sadness, let me bring joy. Where there is darkness, let me bring light. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. From the very beginning, St. Francis lets the Lord know that this is not just a humble request. There's no pleas here. Rather, it's a necessary step he feels must be taken. Make me. No hesitancy there. It must be done. Yet he says, make me an instrument. It is all you, Lord. I am nothing. I am not the doer. But make me an instrument, and make me an instrument of your peace. That peace is you, O Lord. Let me bring your peace to others. In the Apostle John's account of Christ's Last Supper, Christ first washes the feet of his disciples and then gives his last teachings to them. In the middle of all this, Christ says, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled. Neither let them be afraid." Then Christ tells them, "Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing." Abide in me and I in you. That is to say, lose yourself in me and let me live in you. For if you want to be an instrument of the Lord's peace, it's your peace, as St. Francis says, my peace, as Christ says to his disciples, then you must abide in the Lord. You must become free from the ego that separates you from the Lord. So how do we become a true instrument of God's peace? How can we abide in the Lord? St. Francis tells us here, "Where there is hatred, let me bring love." We should note the word bring here. It is used again and again in this poem. You are probably familiar with a well-known and condensed version of this prayer that uses the word sow. Let me sow love. This is the popular version of the prayer that we find most frequently, but in the original Italian, it's very clear, let me bring love. St. Francis is always the instrument. He's not doing anything of himself, nor is he claiming it is his love. He is bringing, carrying the Lord's love and peace. We should remember that this was a man who, before becoming a monk, had a terrible fear and revulsion of lepers. If he just saw a leper in a distance in front of him, he would turn around and run away. But one day he forced himself to overcome this by actually going to the leper colony, and while offering the lepers alms, he kissed the hand of each one of them. Later, one of the first things he did after renouncing the world was to go again to the leper colony and live there for several months, I believe, serving the lepers by bathing and nursing them. In the early days of his monastic order, he also asked his brother monks to do the same. Then St. Francis says, "Where there is injury, let me bring pardon." Obviously, by the word injury here, he does not necessarily mean physical injury. It might also be verbal or mental. Pardoning, forgiving, is actually very important for our spiritual life. For when we cannot forgive someone, we are deliberately holding on to our ego, to our mask. It is by forgiving that we let go. We let go of our ego and surrender all to the Lord, and only then do we become free. Where there is discord, let me bring union. We all know very well how much disharmony there is all over the world now, not to speak of that within families, institutions, and communities. It sometimes seems impossible that any peace can be reached. Yet St. Francis is saying that by being an instrument of the Lord, even this can be accomplished. The same is true in bringing faith to others. Only those who truly abide in God can convey that faith to others, and similarly with bringing truth to those who err. And how often we have wished that we could bring hope and joy when we've seen despair and sadness. How often have we struggled with words to say the right thing to comfort those who despair and are sorrowful. Yet I'm sure all of us have known someone, at least, who, like St. Francis, could lose themselves in others and bring comfort. As a true instrument of the Lord, they could bring light to fill the darkness. What St. Francis is really saying here is that if we can truly abide in the Lord and be an instrument of the Lord's peace, then we will be able to feel others' sufferings as if they are our own. By seeking to console others who are in despair, we forget about ourselves. So also when we seek to understand and forget about being understood, and when we seek to give love and forget about being loved. In a poem, Swami Vivekananda wrote, "Cast into the fire all thy dross of self, thy mean selfishness. Aye, born to the infinite thou art. Within the heart is the ocean of love. Give away. Whoever asks return, his ocean dwindles down to a mere drop." So also St. Francis says, "For it is in giving that we receive." That is, by giving, we receive that ocean of love. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. As mentioned before, we are then set free. We are no longer bound to this world and to those whom we think have harmed us. By dying to the lower self in this way, we attain the higher self. As St. Francis says, it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. That is to say, when our ego abides in the Lord, we realize our true, divine, eternal nature. St. Francis is not talking about physical death here. The whole prayer has been about dying to the ego. But it is in this dying of the ego that we are released from the veils of Maya, of ignorance, of that which keeps us from knowing who we really are. So in this way, St. Francis shows us how to live in this world, being an instrument and bringing the Lord's peace and love to others. By losing ourselves in others, our ego dies and we find our real self. We find ourselves in the Lord. By bringing the Lord's peace to others, we find peace within our own hearts and minds. In Hinduism also, these principles are taught. This is not just a Christian practice, though St. Francis has taught it in an especially beautiful way. And it is a wonderful sadhana for all of us. Now let's look at another path. As we have said before, Ramakrishna taught that a devotee can transform and purify or melt the ego by establishing a relationship with God, such as thinking of oneself as a servant and God as the master. In fact, these relationships are based on visions and experiences not only of Ramakrishna, but also of saints all over the world. Now, there are three major benefits for taking up a relationship with God. First, a relationship is like a cord that binds us to our chosen deity. That is to say, in taking up a relationship, we make a commitment to ourselves and to the Lord to belong to him or her in a particular way. Second, a relationship with the Lord makes it easier for us to surrender our ego to the Lord. We understand that we belong to him and that he belongs to us, so no matter what happens, the Lord is there with us. And third, it makes it easier for us to think of the Lord. As soon as we think of the Lord, we immediately identify ourself, our lower self, our ego, with that relationship. I am the Lord's friend. We're always together. Or I am the Lord's child. I am totally under his or her protection. After all, it makes sense in a devotional context. We have a natural relationship with people we love, with all those we love in this world. We love our parents because they are our parents. We love our friends because they're our friends. No one has to tell us to love our parents or love our friends. It comes naturally. So if we want to love God, we must feel some relationship with him or her. So what are these relationships? In the various Hindu traditions, there are many relationships with God, but in general, they boil down to 5 or 6 main ones. And all these Ramakrishna has practiced and talked about in the Gospel. The first is called Shanta Bhava. Ramakrishna called it the serene attitude. He said the rishis of olden times had this attitude toward God. They did not desire any worldly enjoyment. In other words, the rishis only desired to realize God or Brahman. So also in this attitude, one only desires to fix one's mind on the Lord and realize him. Next is Daisya, the attitude of a servant towards the master. Ramakrishna said Hanuman had this attitude toward Rama. He felt the strength of a lion when he worked for Rama. This attitude is very good for the practice of karma yoga. Perhaps we don't feel that our job is very important in the scheme of things, but if we think of it as a way of being a servant to the Lord in some capacity or other, then we can feel closer to God through it. Then there is Sakyabhava, the attitude of friendship. Ramakrishna said, friends say to one another, come here and sit near me. It's like the attitude of Krishna's cowherd friends. They are equals. Now, there's no awe or fear of God when one is a friend of his. Though Swami Sardananda does not give a description of Ramakrishna's practice of this relationship, he does say that he practiced it. And I believe it was Swami Premananda who mentioned that at one point, Ramakrishna practiced the attitude of Balaram, Krishna's older brother, and this is a form of Sakyabhava. Fourth is Vatsalya, the attitude of a mother towards her divine child, or a father towards his divine child. Ramakrishna says this was Yashoda's attitude towards Krishna. Yashoda was Krishna's foster mother, actually. Ramakrishna also practiced this attitude with Ramlala, the child Rama. But in spite of this naughty Ramlala trying his patience many times, his love for the divine child was really extraordinary. Again, as in Sakyabhava, there's no fear or awe or hesitation in this attitude. The love for God is, in fact, all-encompassing and removes all thought of God being the protector. Instead, we are the Lord's protector. Then fifth is Modara, the attitude of a woman for her lover or husband. Ramakrishna also says that all the other attitudes, Shanta, Daisya, Sakya, Vatsalya, all the other attitudes are included in Modara Bhava. When this attitude towards the Lord deepens, as Ramakrishna found, one cannot bear the slightest separation from him. There's another attitude that is not usually included in these 5 Vaishnava attitudes, and that is Apatya Bhava, the attitude of a child toward the Divine Mother or the Divine Father. This was, in fact, Ramakrishna's main attitude. Most of the time, he felt himself to be a child of the Divine Mother. A child always feels protected and loved by his parents. So how do we know what attitude or relationship to take up? In a rare case, the guru might tell the disciple what relationship to take up with the chosen deity. But more often than not, the relationship gradually grows in the heart of the devotee when the seed of the devotee's devotion starts to sprout. But this is not to say that we cannot experiment. Ramakrishna did not tell us to wait till we reached a certain stage of devotion. So we can take up an attitude from whatever stage we are at in our devotion. The relationship may change in course of time, but that's okay. Meanwhile, we've had the benefit of feeling close to the Lord. Generally, we find that one life inspires another. So a person might choose a relationship with God after being inspired by the life of someone else who had a particular relationship. That person's life might be included in a religious text, such as Hanuman's life in one of the many Ramayanas, or Uddhava's life in the Bhagavatam, or it might be inspired by the life of a more recent saint, such as Gopalarma, who became a mother to baby Krishna. However, we should note that while the life stories of recent saints are known and can be verified, regarding the others, we need not worry about the historical accuracy or correctness of them. Whatever inspires us, whatever works, let it work. Ramakrishna himself did not worry about these things. In fact, even in the Hindu Puranas, there are many versions of each of the stories, and no one cares. Like good poetry, the only thing that matters is what inspires us. Again, according to the Vaishnava tradition, these attitudes are intended to be practiced in relation to a personal God with form. However, we find in other traditions, Islam and Christianity, for instance, that devotees do not necessarily practice them with a form of God in mind. In that case, God is personal yet formless, but it still works. Though Madhura Bhava is often considered to be the highest of the attitudes, we should note that whatever attitude or relationship we take up with the Lord, that is the highest. If it takes us to the Lord, it can't get higher than that. For the Lord himself is the highest goal and the fulfillment of all desires. This goes also for whether our final and ultimate goal is the personal God or the impersonal absolute. Whatever relationship we have with the Lord will take us to that goal. Swami Sardananda's chapter on the spiritual aspirant and spiritual discipline in Sri Ramakrishna and his Divine Play discusses this very point about how the worship of a personal God can lead to the impersonal absolute. We should also note that Swami Vivekananda himself did spiritual practices with a relationship with God. Most of us think of him as solely as an Advaitist, but this isn't so. According to his disciple Swami Bodhananda, Swamiji's bhava, or relationship with the Lord, was Sakyabhava, the mood of a friend to the divine friend. And Swamiji's disciples and his brother monks could see this in Swamiji's relationship with Ramakrishna. Swamiji sometimes called Ramakrishna Bandhu, or friend. And we know that when they were both alive, they used to joke around and tease each other like friends. There's an interesting incident that illustrates Swamiji's meditating in this mood. It was told by Hallister Sturgis, Betty Leggett's son from her first marriage. Hallister told it to his son, Paul. Swamiji was then staying as a guest of the Leggetts in the manor house at Ridgely Manor. The story goes, one day the young boy, Hallister, walked by Swamiji's closed bedroom door and heard peals of laughter coming from the room. When Swamiji finally emerged later, Hallister said, "Who were you talking to?" "I was alone in meditation," Swamiji said. "But what was all that laughter about?" Hallister said. And after a pause to recall his laughter in meditation, Swamiji replied, "Oh, God is so funny." Apparently, if you've been to Ridgely Manor and seen Swamiji's room there, Swamiji was meditating in front of the fireplace there in that room. Now let's look at another way to abide in the Lord and lose ourselves in Him, and that is by repeating the name of the Lord, or a mantra. Some of us, perhaps, have received a mantra from a guru, or maybe we repeat a name of the God of the Lord as a mantra. We've been told that the mantra has power. In fact, many saints have testified that the mantra is powerful enough to take us to God. We can easily understand how powerful even ordinary words are. For instance, we know very well how hurtful words can cause pain to others. It does not take much to understand the power in them. Again, we all know the feeling that just a few kind words can produce, and this was what St. Francis was emphasizing also. Now, if our ordinary words have so much power, just imagine how much more power a mantra has. Yet often we find that people do not have much faith in it. This is because the mantra is such a subtle thing, and so is its power. It's very difficult to comprehend how such a subtle thing can work. Ramakrishna often spoke about the effects of repeating the name of God. Once he said, if a person repeats the name of God, his body, mind, and everything become pure. Have faith in his name. Again, he said, there is great power in the seed of God's name. It destroys ignorance. A seed is tender and the sprout soft. Still, it pierces the hard ground. The ground breaks and makes way for the sprout. Swami Saprakashananda used to describe how at the time of initiation, when one receives a mantra from the Guru, it's as if the Guru has planted a seed in one's heart. It's up to us then to water and nourish that seed by repeating the mantra, and not just repeating it mechanically, but by repeating it with faith and devotion. If this is done, then the seed will gradually sprout and grow into a beautiful plant with flowers and fruits. The flowers are our spiritual experiences, and the fruit is our liberation. But of course, patience is necessary. Just as you cannot expect a seed to sprout and grow in one day, you cannot expect to results so quickly with your japa. But one thing that is emphasized here is that the mantra, like a seed, is a living thing. It's living. It is God. And this is no airy-fairy ghost we're talking about. Ramakrishna said, God and his name are identical. There is no difference between Rama and his holy name. So how is this possible that the name of God and God himself are one and the same? Let's look at it this way. A mantra is made up of a series of sounds, which, as we repeat them, take the form of subtle waves or vibrations within us. If we see sounds reproduced on a special recording device, we will see that each sound creates a particular wave. Yet, according to science, every material thing in this universe is also composed of waves and particles. One moment they are seen as waves, and the next as particles. Everything is both at the same time. Now, what finer wave could there be than the personal God? So if the name of the Lord and the Lord himself are both waves, then those waves of the mantra and the waves of the form are identical. And scientists have actually seen examples of this on recording devices. Now, regarding the process of this, Swami Vivekananda says in his Bhakti Yoga, in the individual, the thought waves rising in the chitta, or mind, must manifest themselves first as words, and then as the more concrete forms. So, first thought waves, then words, and then concrete forms. Moreover, as Swamiji says, the same personal God can and does take various manifestations, and each of them, therefore, must have a particular word symbol to express it. This is the mantra for each form of God. That's why the mantras are different. Swamiji says, these word symbols evolved out of the deepest spiritual perception of sages, symbolize and express as nearly as possible the particular view of God and the universe they stand for, and they are all helpful to divine meditation and the acquisition of true knowledge. In other words, as you repeat the mantra within you, you are stirring up a living force of vibration within you. This living force is the Lord, and that Lord gradually becomes awakened within you. And when the Lord is awakened within you, your whole life is blessed. And most important of all, this is how you lose yourself in the Lord. You then become a perfect instrument of the Lord by being united with the Lord. Now, the devotees of the path of devotion have it relatively easy. They transform the ego from one that is attached to the world to one that is attached to the personal and loving aspect of God. As we said before, they do this by taking up a personal relationship with God, or they transform the ego by repeating the name of the Lord. By attaching the ego in this way to the Lord through meditation and japam, the ego gradually becomes more and more purified until it finally melts through pure love, and the real self then shines through. Yet there's something similar in the path of knowledge. Like the Arundhati Darshana Nyaya, the practice of directing one's attention from the gross level to the subtle and more subtle levels, in the same way, we can take the ego from its identification with the gross body to more and more subtle levels until it melts away into the real self. We should remember, too, that meditation itself, if done rightly, is the primary process in surrendering the ego. Through our meditation and other spiritual disciplines, we practice surrendering the ego, losing the ego. But then the real surrender of the ego takes place when we have the experience of Brahman or God. Now, we can't go into great detail about this sadhana, but we can give an outline. The sadhana is done through shravana, manana, and nididhyasana. That is, through hearing, reasoning, and meditation. First, shravana, literally hearing. We must first hear or learn from a teacher the process of discriminating about who or what we are. Are we this body? Are we the life force? Are we the mind or the intellect? Reading is also helpful. Vedantic texts such as the Panchadashi and the VedantaSTL are very helpful for this. But we need a teacher to clarify the difficult points. Second, manana, literally reasoning. When we really analyze ourselves, we find we are none of these things. We cannot be the body, as it is ephemeral. It's here today and gone tomorrow. It's the same with the life force. The mind also is constantly changing, and so also is the intellect. These four sheaths, or koshas, as the Panchadashi calls them, that is the body, the Annamaya kosha, the life force, the Pranamaya kosha, the mind, the Manomaya kosha, and the intellect, the Vijnanamaya kosha. These four make up the gross and subtle bodies. According to the Panchadashi, the ego is included in the Vijnanamaya kosha, the sheath of the intellect. This is a very subtle level, and so this is why the ego is so hard to deal with. In addition, however, there is another body, the causal body, which is comprised of the fifth sheath, the Anandamaya kosha, the sheath of bliss. This sheath is the closest to the Atman, the real self. So it partakes of some qualities of the Atman. But these qualities are only reflections of the bliss of the Atman. They're not the true bliss. According to Shankara, through the causal body, the ego enjoys the fruits of its actions, and it gets joy from mundane activities and objects. Again, on waking up from deep sleep, the ego says, I have slept well. But this is the extent of its enjoyment. If we want the bliss of Brahman, we have to understand who the real enjoyer is. As the Panchadashi says, this bliss sheath, the Anandamaya kosha, also cannot be the self because it is temporal and impermanent. That bliss, which is the source of this reflection, the reflected bliss is the self, for it is eternal and immutable, unchangeable. So now our discriminative faculty processes this knowledge and tells us that these three bodies, the gross body, the subtle body, and the causal body, and the five sheaths, are not the real self, and that our goal lies beyond them. This is manana, reasoning that makes us understand who and what we really are. Then the next step is to meditate, nididhyasana. At this level, we try to separate the real self from the not self, just as we separate the inner blade of grass from a piece of grass from its stalk. Then, when we achieve this separation, we attain our goal of realization through samadhi. As the Panchadashi says, when by shravana and manana the mind develops a firm and undoubted conviction, and then dwells constantly on the thus ascertained self alone, it is called unbroken meditation, nididhyasana. Then when the mind gradually leaves off the idea of meditator and the act of meditation and is finally merged in the sole object of meditation, merged in that object of meditation, the self, and it is steady like the flame of a lamp in a breezeless place, then that is called the superconscious state, samadhi. The Panchadashi says, thus a person distinguishes the self from the five sheaths, concentrates the mind on the self according to the scriptural injunctions. It becomes free from the bonds of repeated births and deaths and immediately attains the supreme bliss. That is, the attainment is immediately when all parts of this process fall into place. Ramakrishna, in fact, says in one place that God can be known by the pure buddhi, that is the intellect, which is the same as the pure self. He says the seers of old directly perceived the pure self through their pure buddhi. So the intellect. So it comes to a point when the buddhi becomes purified, it melts into the pure self. They're not really two separate entities. And as the ego is, according to the Panchadashi, associated with the buddhi, that means the ego also has melted into the pure self and has been purified. It is no longer the ordinary ego. And this is why you see in the gospel, Ramakrishna mentions again several times, he can speak of the ego of knowledge or the ego of devotion. It's this purified, melted ego. So it's all a matter of surrendering the lower self to the higher self and allowing the higher self, the pure Atman, to manifest. And this is why Swami Vivekananda tells us again and again to manifest the divinity that is already within us. It is in our hands. Through right discrimination and also yearning, we can do it. So here we have given a few ways to effect this transformation. By losing ourselves in others, by losing ourselves through a relationship with the personal God, by losing ourselves through repetition of the name of the Lord, and last, by losing ourselves in the process of attaining knowledge through hearing, reasoning, and meditation. These processes are given here as if they are separate paths, but they're not really separate. When we really analyze these paths, we see that they are all doing exactly the same thing. Moreover, all these methods can, if one likes, be used together, for they are all meant for the same thing, to melt away the mask of the ego. Actually, whether we know it or not, our whole being in all its expressions is geared toward making this transformation, transforming our lower self to realize our real self, to attain the ultimate reality or God. This is because this ultimate reality is right within us. We cannot get away from him because he is our own real self. Again, our real self, the Lord within us, is that love and bliss that we have been seeking all our life. He is within us and he is outside of us. Whether we see him in our heart, or we have a vision outside of him, or we see him in those we serve, whichever way, we understand that God is our very own self. And there's no true love and bliss without him. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuddhatmaprana, for her very thoughtful lecture on self. Self. Everybody has ego. Nobody can live in this world without ego. And this ego is the wall between the infinite and the finite. So we are in the finite world, so we are bound. And now, how we can release this ego? How can we go to the infinite? That is the reason we practice spiritual disciplines. It reminds me of a story of Swami Vivekananda. Mademoiselle Calvé, the famous opera singer in the 19th century and the 20th century, She came and had an interview with Swamiji. Swamiji told her, Madam, she was trying to commit suicide. Her daughter died from burning. You calm yourself. Your talent, your work needs that. Oh no, Swami, I want to preserve my individuality. Swamiji said, you are not an individual. You are the infinite. Swamiji was trying to remind our true self, real self. Then Swamiji gave an illustration that I sometimes visualize. Do you know how do I look at it? Here is the Pacific Ocean, and billions of bubbles are floating. Bubbles. When rain falls in the water, it makes a bubble. So these billions of bubbles are floating on the surface of the Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific Ocean is telling, hey, be one with me. The bubble says, no, 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 I shall preserve my individuality. I shall preserve myself. The ocean says, billions of bubbles have become one with me. Why are you preserving yourself? Be one with me. No. That is going on in each one of us. This bubble, as you know, which is just a little, some kind of water, you know, is there. Punch it, pump. Just one little punch is enough to destroy that bubble. Little punch. Or perhaps hitting one another, they can burst also. So all these human beings, you know, they are floating like bubbles. That is the way I visualize this eye. Another thing, she brought it in a very nice way. That this eye, how can I spiritualize it? Through four ways, as Vedanta teaches, through karma yoga. Use yourself serving others. Forget yourself. Second, through love. When Jesus appeared before Magdalene after resurrection, what she said? My God, my love. My love, my God. Her eye was merged into Jesus' consciousness. My love, my God. Then from Jnana Yoga, I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi. That way also you can spiritualize your ego. And the fourth, through meditation. Anyhow, then in the beginning, the one she said, I practice that, I try to practice that one. It is in the Katha Upanishad. God created the sense organs with outgoing tendencies. Only when you sit in meditation, you will say mind, boom, boom, boom. Mind going through the eyes, outside. But there are some people with a view to experiencing the self, the real self. We have two selves, lower self, higher self. When we try to experience the higher self, what do? We shut the senses, abrito chakshuhu. We shut the senses and be one and go within. Then we can see that this real self and the higher self and the lower self have become one. That is called samadhi. Their eye merges into God. That is her main focus of her lecture, to lose oneself, to find oneself. Anyhow, she gave a very good talk. Thank you, Shuddhatmaprana, coming to us and giving us a beautiful talk. Thank you. Now, let me say a prayer. Atma me shuddhantam jyotiraham viraja vipapma bhuyasam. Antaratma me shuddhantam jyotiraham viraja vipapma bhuyasam. Paramatma me shuddhantam jyotiraham virajavi papma bhuyasam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May my body become pure. May I be free from impurities and ignorance. May I realize myself as the light divine. May my mind become pure. May I be free from impurities and ignorance. May I realize myself as the light divine. May my soul become pure. May I be free from impurities and ignorance. May I realize myself as the light divine. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you all. So, Shuddhatmaprana will go to the library. Please talk to her, and I shall be involved with Zoom. Thank you.